and this is chapter 4, section 2, the ego and false autonomy. It is reasonable to ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. In fact, it is the best question you could ask. There is, however, no point in giving an answer in terms of the past, because the past does not matter, and history would not exist if the same errors were not being repeated in the present. Abstract thought applies to knowledge, because knowledge is completely impersonal, and examples are irrelevant to its understanding. Perception, however, is always specific, and therefore quite concrete. Everyone makes an ego or a self for himself, which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. Their interaction is a process that alters both, because they were not made by or with the unalterable. It is important to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical proximity. Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. There could be no better example that the ego is only idea and not a fact. And this is, I think, a moment to pause and understand what this is saying. I know I have a way of thinking of this, and maybe everyone else does. This whole concept of thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. I know I certainly have previously just fallen under a strange spell of sorts where you're under the impression that you know somebody did something and you're miffed at this person, and it's like, and when you think of this person, you just think of that like, oh, I can't believe they did that. Now, what if they didn't do that? What if we just made that up in our mind? We're thinking, you know, we think, let's say, this person broke my window or something. We have this idea that they broke my window. I can't believe this, you know, so angry at this person. But what if that wasn't actually them? What if they didn't break the window? Then all of a sudden, our whole perception of this person changes. All of a sudden, rather than thinking of this person, the first thing we think is, I'm angry. This person is holding back something from me. This person broke my window. That could just not be true. It just could be completely made up. And if we in our mind, if we say, well, what if they didn't? Oh, okay. This person is cool. You know, like it, just like that, it could change our entire perception about a person, about an individual, about a soul. And so I think,
or even,
go ahead.
I was going to say, even if that person did it, but you are, you know, making up the motivations for whatever, you know, for the situation, is also often what happens in our own mind.
Exactly.
There are so many layers to it, because even jumping on that, Paula, even if somebody did it and we had the intention wrong, it also could be that we had the intention right, but that person was in a particular state when they did it, right?
Yeah.
And then when they were out of that state, they recognize that it's not what they ever meant to do because it wasn't from the heart. And at each stage of that, our ego, the perception, you know, we create a whole storyline about it, and it can affect, you know, it can affect everything. But to see that this is happening, right, allows us to, you know, jump out of it, so to speak. Teresa?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's amazing what can happen in the shower. Right? They have the you know, about shower thoughts, but it's amazing how you can have a fight with someone in the shower. And if they said that to me, I'll say that I can remember being in my 20s and I'd get out and boy, did I have a duke out in the shower with someone, right? So And I remember the moment it became an awareness, and I was laughing so hard at myself that how ridiculous. You know, if somebody could see inside our heads, they would all be belly laughing, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Intention, right? Just when we feel attacked and defensive and we really are coming from our own perspective and not pulling back the lens and taking that bigger view and multiple perspectives. Yeah. It's a huge step.
Yes.
Yeah. It's what's interesting is all of these things clearly, you know, all teachings of truth kind of point to the fact that time is not how we really think it is, that time is an illusion, of course, and there's one time perhaps, but all of these things, that this story that we're could be making up or just retelling, it's never here. It's never here now. It's always something that is either possibly in the past or possibly in the future. In other words, not here. So we're just removing ourselves from here, or trying to, by just imagining, just fantasizing about something that we don't even like, you know? So it's just strange. It's, yeah, so.
We don't have to decide now based on some part of the story that happened, right? It happened. And does that make sense to you? Like, this happened, this is how I perceived it, this is how I felt about it. So I know that I'm going to act this way in some certain situation in the future, like making some kind of decision now based on some reaction I had to something that already happened. It's such an energy drain. For one thing, it's not even real or true. As Tim said, it's not happening now anyway. But I know for me, it's habitual. You know, the one thing follows the other. Something happens, I perceive it a certain way, I feel a certain way, and then I make a plan for my life to protect myself, you know, usually from what might happen. And it never plays out that way. I mean,
and it's all based on those stories that we tell ourselves. And I guess that's where it's like we're making that story up in our head, and that's what we're reacting to, is this, you know, that story, whether it really happened or not in our mind. That's how we're explaining it all to ourselves, but it's just more of that ego building, I guess.
It's like Tim said in the email, I don't know if y'all read it, but
continue to make that ego
over and over and over again. And it's like Tim said in the email, if you read the email, it's illusion land. Right. No, it's not even real.
I had something very interesting happen about, very similar to this. I don't know why, but I started watching one of those videos in one of the emails where I think it was called Ask Jeff Hayes or something. Has anyone seen those? No. Anyway, see.
No,
I'm diabetic and I've had a toenail infection for centuries, and everything that I've ever done hasn't worked. So I was fascinated by this one doctor who was describing everything that had ever happened to me. And I'm listening to this and thinking, you know, there's one born every minute, and I was raising my hand because I was addicted to this thing. I just could not turn it off. Because, I mean, I'm not going to tell you the story of my life, but you can watch
Jeff Hayes. We'll get the story.
Yeah. And you know, like I'm saying, Holy Spirit, help, 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 right? And then I'm heading out to get my credit card. And I'm Canadian, so everything is a minimum of 25% more plus. So it's more like 30 or 35 when you pay the shipping. And I'm thinking, you know, this is not going to end well. And and just as I'm headed over to get the credit card, and of course they've got deadlines, you know, like do it now to save $100. And I'm thinking, I think this is fear, right?
Yeah.
And just as I was about to jump over the cliff, Holy Spirit yanked me up.
Good.
But that was close. Thank you for listening, because
Thank you for listening. You listened when it mattered.
Well, I mean, you see, this is the thing, is that my ego was right in there. It's my ego that went to get the credit card. But self said, now, hand out. So I guess you saved me $150. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, and more importantly, a whole lot of worry, probably.
Well, plus the darn thing doesn't work. I mean, you know, all of my issues are going through the atonement. So what do I need the pills for?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We get into a bit of magic in this. Of Course in Miracles refers to that as magic is the word it uses. So that we go into a bit of that chapter. And magic, it's also a biblical term. That's why all these terms are really not really ego, but magic is used in the Bible. If when Moses throws his staff down and it becomes a serpent, then all the other people used magic to emulate him. It's also in the New Testament, people using magic to try and, I don't know, win people over. So it's the same concept, that sort of magic. Also, Teresa, I forgot to ask you about your snow. You said you got like 2 feet of snow?
I got 15 inches in 12 hours and then more after. But yeah, it has been very exciting, but it is raining and raining now. So I can leave the property today for the first time. Is back east really having trouble. They got 6 feet in 15 hours.
Where are you?
I'm on Vancouver Island. I'm in British Columbia. I'm in Comox.
Oh,
So
you're another Canadian.
Yes, I'm Canadian. So
Kidding.
I understand everything costs a lot more when you're buying in America.
Yeah, I was wondering why you were so enthusiastic about my story.
I understand your story totally.
Yeah. And Karen, how was the tow truck? I got a text from Karen last night saying, I'm in a tow truck.
I was in a tow truck. I was in this tow truck, and the tow truck driver, Augie, his name is August, he goes by Augie, said to me as we were driving along, do you feel like you're in a spaceship? And I said, yeah, that is a really good way of describing it, because we were really high up. It was like a flatbed tow truck, not just a little truck pulling my car behind on a chain. My car was on the flatbed part, and we were really high up, and there were these huge glass windows all around. It was pretty fun. It was quite an adventure. When he was putting my car on the tow truck an hour away from where I live, where I'd been visiting, he got a call from a friend of his, who was an hour north of that, and I lived south, who had just gotten into a car accident, and asked if he could come get her car off the side of the road. And so he looked at me and he said, this is kind of interesting, Tim, on the heels of the email that went out yesterday, the We Say Yes email. He looked at me and he said, how much of a hurry are you in to get home? And I didn't know what the phone call was that he got. It was a very odd question, as you know, through AAA, as he was putting my car on when he was supposed to take me home. So I just looked at him. I didn't understand the question, and then he explained, and I said, well, yes, of course, we should go help your friend. Well, I might not get home till 8:30, which I didn't, but I didn't say that. But yeah, so the experience on the tow truck was amazing. And I will say in public, I told him I love you.
Yeah.
It was my first getting over my trepidation of saying that to a stranger. And I really had to work myself up into it. And I did a little preface sentence like, well, Augie, we're all brothers and sisters on this planet. And I love you, brother.
Nice.
And he said, he was taking photos of my car identification number and my license plate. And then I thought he was done. And I said it to him. And then he said, thank you. And then he went and took another picture. I don't think he knew what to do with it.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So I hope you weren't in an accident.
I
hope
wasn't in an accident.
Broke down.
My car just was making some outer space kind of sounds, and I didn't want to drive an hour with the car making those kinds of sounds. But
yikes!
It was a wonderful evening in all respects.
In a spaceship.
In a spaceship, yeah.
Is your car okay now? Is your car okay now, Karen?
Well, my car is in my garage, and I'm going to call the mechanic tomorrow. I think I should be able to drive it a mile to the shop.
Okay, good.
I don't think it is quite okay yet. I'm not sure. It's a 1991. It's quite an old little car. So, but it will be fun.
Maybe you should atone for it. But I'm not kidding.
Maybe.
No, they all have consciousness, animate or inanimate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think it just wants to go hang out with the nice people in the shop.
Maybe not. They might not find anything.
I'll find out in the morning when I turn it on.
No, that spaceship ride may have healed it.
All kinds of
Yeah.
things. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm completely open to those possibilities. Yep. So I'll turn the car on before I call the shop.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I assume Jasper is okay too, Shabana, and just in different form, spirit perhaps.
Yes, I'm sad that. Well, we had the polar vortex, where Calgary was colder than the Arctic for 10 days, and today it's warmer.
Nice.
So, yeah. No, but Jasper, as you said, he's
The best. And hello. I'm not sure who's calling in, but thank you for joining us. We are reading our book here. So I think we'll continue. We're on paragraph 3, chapter 4, section 2. So we continue. Your own state of mind is a good example of how the ego was made. When you threw knowledge away, it is as if you never had it. This is so apparent that one need only recognize it to see that it does happen. If this occurs in the present, why is it surprising that it occurred in the past? Surprise is a reasonable response to the unfamiliar, though hardly to something that occurs with such persistence. But do not forget that the mind need not work that way, even though it does work that way now. And, well, here's another, at least brief section of pause. This kind of answers are, at least starts to provide us with some satisfaction because there isn't really an answer to how the mind made the ego. And the workbook is kind of, I'd say at least the first few parts of the workbook are aligned with that, in a sense of letting us get over our need for answers and need for meaning and need to know everything. And so that's the same motivation which drives us to ask, well, why does the ego exist? And so I think most importantly, why do we have to know? And do we need to know? We don't. But we frame it in such a way typically that it's, how could the ego have been created in the past? Like in the past, how was it created in the past? And this is telling us right now, well, it continues to exist right now so long as you choose it. So why are we concerning ourselves with the past if it happens right now? Who needs a historical answer? Why do we need something that's removed from here now to answer this? Just look at right here, right now. Are we choosing ego, or are we choosing? Are we choosing, or are we trying to make the ego real? Perhaps.
Part of my this was very potent for me, this paragraph, and part of my question, my version of the question, like, how did it happen, was, why in the world would mind have done that, such a thing? Like, how did it happen? Why would that happen? And when I read this, it was just a big old kiss on my forehead. It was like, well, look, it's happening. It happens over and over and over again. Well, why? Well, because you don't choose love. That's why. It happens over and over again. So how could it have happened? Well, how could it happen right now? It's the same question. How in the world could it happen right now? Well, it's a good question, but let's look at it right now instead of how did it happen in the first place.
Also, Karen, what you're saying makes me think, maybe perhaps allows us to better understand how framing it in such a way as how did we make it, in the sense that we made it in the past, and that's responsible for it being here now. It
Yes.
takes away our responsibility and makes it as if it was a decision that was made, and here it is, and we don't have a choice anymore. So this and it just says we have the choice right now to choose love.
What about sentence 2 in number 3? When you threw knowledge away, it is as if you never had it.
What about sentence 2? Yes,
You
what
know-
about it? I know. That is
So-
one of those things.
When we did that act,
Yeah.
that was the act, right? And then when you look up what knowledge is, that sentence really stuck with me. I had to go back after I read all this, and then I had to find out what knowledge meant. So then I had to pursue. So then I went to the clarifications of terms, and I had to look at false perception, true perception, and what knowledge actually means in this context. So
How do you what's your understanding of knowledge from your reading through clarification?
okay, so where I see it as is page 86 in the clarification of terms, and it says, and this is verse 7, and now God's knowledge, changeless, certain, pure, and wholly understandable, enters its kingdom. Gone is perception, false and true alike. Gone is forgiveness, for its task is done. So
Wow,
there's
that's a
the
beautiful
ultimate
description.
nugget, like the pearl. Right? It took me a long time to get through all that, and when I got to there, and I went, oh, there's the pearl.
It is. It is. I'm so glad you read that. You know, when I read this sentence, it kind of took me by surprise a little bit. Threw away, like that's saying something. And then I kind of teased it out, remembering that knowledge and perception, that you can't go knowledge to perception, perception to knowledge. They're two different levels. That they don't communicate with each other. So when the ego threw away knowledge, then it was in, perception land. Right and wrong minded
And
thinking, both. Yeah, Paula.
What came to my mind when I read that sentence was the whole, Christian myth of, choosing, of the whole tree of knowledge and being kicked out of, out of paradise, the Garden of Eden or whatever. And I thought, wait a minute, because that thought just came to my mind, and I thought, well, it can't be referring to that. But that could be like a Christian interpretation of that sentence. If you thought, oh, that's when we, supposedly, according to the myth, we accepted knowledge over God, or that was what we were attempting to do with by eating of the tree of knowledge. But this, when it's saying you threw away knowledge, it's almost just like the direct opposite.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So what's interesting about this is A Course in Miracles would have its own interpretation of eating of the tree of knowledge and the events that unfolded, and just looking at it from the perspective of A Course in Miracles, which I'll go on a limb as to say that pun, it's only slightly intended, going out on a limb talking about the tree here, is when it's certainly not the act. I think we've already read the section saying, why would God put us in a position where we could destroy ourselves? That doesn't make sense. So it's not the eating of the fruit that's the beginning of the separation. It's eating of the fruit. It's listening to the lies of the serpent, where the serpent says, if you eat of this tree, you will become like God. So what's interesting is listening to that, we could take it to mean that we are not already like God. So if we take that, if we listen to those words, it's, oh, I'm not like God. Let me eat this so that I can be. And so then eat the fruit, and then that's the guilt. This guilt unfolds. God didn't banish us from the garden. We banished ourselves. We projected this guilt, and we threw away knowledge. We just left we left Eden, essentially. So I think that makes, I don't know, I'm just thinking this out, but I really like that you brought that up, Paula. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, it didn't help me understand that was what in this whole, that sentence, but that was what came to my mind initially. But I was like, wait a minute, no, that can't be what it means. But I just went on from there, which is usually what I do when I come to a spot that doesn't make sense to me and I try to understand it. Then I just have to move on, because I could sit there for hours trying to make sense of something.
There's something very interesting about the myth as it's been, told to us, the Judeo-Christian myth. of that Garden of Eden, eating of the tree of knowledge story, because the idea that God would set it up such that we would do something and then have to be punished is insane. It's inconceivable. If you think about what God is, God would never do such a thing, would never set it up in such a way. And yet that one little interpretation created a whole world of perception and action.
Well, what's interesting, Karen, is that that's, I'd say, the surface level inspection of this text. You know, that's what we've been told. We say, this is what you read it, and this is what, but A Course in Miracles allows us to reframe it so that it at least makes sense. We can understand this person, Adam, and clearly it's a story, you know, it's like a parable where, this is the beginning of projection, projecting guilt onto God, projecting fear, that we're not enough, projecting it onto God. So separating. There's no difference and until that projection occurred. And then once that projection occurred, then we left the garden. We kicked ourselves out. We threw away knowledge. So
it's actually a very valuable story reframed.
Yeah, exactly. And that is, Teresa, that Garden of Eden, that represents knowledge, because it's, as Karen said, the knowledge, A Course in Miracles uses perception and knowledge, and you cannot go from, it's like a plane being on the ground, and there's just trash all around, there's just cars around it and stuff, so the plane can't take off on the runway. It can't move because there's trash around the wheels. It can't even move. That's the trash is the perception. So right perception, A Course in Miracles, makes way for knowledge to happen. Removing the trash allows the plane to take off. It's not removing it that lets the plane fly. Removing the trash doesn't make the plane fly, but it sets it up in order to happen. Same thing with knowledge from perception. So we're told you get right perception so that you're in a place to be with knowledge. They're not the same, but one leads to the other.
But not to be able to go from correct perception to knowledge, but almost like the hand of God comes down and lifts you up from perception. Right? You can't get on a train and go from even right perception to knowledge. That's how I see it from the readings I've been doing lately. There's not a train. Like, you can't get on number 401 and get there. But from knowledge, when you are in correct perception, then it's just like, I don't know, I imagine it as kind of like lifting you, just carrying you forward to it.
We're going to come up to it because I have a star by number 11.
Okay.
So we read, I've got a star and I highlight, and it's actually Karen saying what you're saying.
Oh, okay.
Right? So we're going to come to it.
That's in paragraph 11, Teresa?
Pardon?
You said that's in paragraph 11?
Yes.
I think I was reading it in the Earth text yesterday, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
merely a temporary expedient. Correcting perception. Right?
And for me, it was such a beautiful concept. Like, I didn't get upset that I couldn't get on the train, you know, from perception to knowledge. It wasn't upsetting. It was just information like, oh, right. But you can be brought into that. Right? Like, wow, that's lovely.
Yeah, A Course in Miracles gives us a lot of these nice little images to think of things in this way. I think an extension of what you're saying, Karen, or maybe the same one, is there's this bridge. It speaks of a bridge between essentially perception and knowledge. And I mean, you think bridge, you think like a sizable distance, you know. It's not a step. It's a journey. And so, but this bridge we take the first step, and then God lifts us across to the other side. So it's really just that little willingness. You take that single first step towards knowledge, towards truth. It's just that, okay. And that's the journey. It's that single step.
That's right.
So, yeah, it's there's also a continuing sentiment that God will lift you. The last step is God lifting you to God's self. There's always this line, God will take the last step, or God will pick you up. So it's like we come to a certain point, and then, it's an interesting visual, or an interesting line, and I'm not sure when we'll get there eventually, but
there's something in the readings about and I'll want to discuss this when we get to it, because it's one of those places where I still kind of like, what now? And it says, God is lonely. Like we are lonely for God. And it says God is lonely for the sons of God. And so, God wants us to take that step, that little willingness. And then it's like, come on over, right? Come back to me. Yeah. It's lovely.
Yeah, we are lonely without God, and God is lonely without his sons.
That's what it says.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's no difference, really. It has to be both if it's either.
If it's either. Yep.
Okay. So I think we're on paragraph 4 here. Okay. As my mama cat sits on my lap here, fittingly enough, think of the love animals for their offspring. This little cat has her offspring in this RV, so perhaps she knew that I would be reading this right now. Right, Mama? And the need they feel to protect them. That is because they regard them as part of themselves. No one dismisses something he considers part of himself. You react to your ego much as God does to God's creations, with love, protection, and charity. Your reactions to the self you made are not surprising. In fact, they resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are. The question is not how you respond to the ego, but what you believe you are. Belief is an ego function, and as long as your origin is open to belief, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self, the capital S self, the true self. So this is an interesting, at least worthy of a bit further thinking through, at least how it's drawing this analogy between offspring, physical offspring, children, and our mental offspring, our creation, our mental constructions, the things we make. So we share the same love as all animals. I mean, we're animals too, as all animals have for their offspring. There's just an inherent love because it's part of ourself. And A Course in Miracles shows us that is why we feel such a love, such an attachment to the things we make, like ego self and our self-image and these things, because we made it, because it seems like a part of ourself. Even though we didn't create it, where we're told one day, what do you think about this, Karen? Which sentence is it? 6. In fact, they resemble in many ways, how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are.
Well, let's see. In fact,
As
your
a-
reactions to the self you made are not surprising, right?
but putting that right up against that, your reactions to these things that we made, our ego, and in fact, they resemble how you will one day react to your real creations.
Right. I mean, with love, right? With love, because we make them with love and protection and care.
What do you think these real creations are?
Oh, what do I think the real creations are? Oh,
Yeah.
those are the in contrast to the making of things, the real creations would be just anything that comes from the heart. The real creations are the extensions of love that go out, the thoughts of love and actions that follow the thoughts. Nothing but that. Real creation is, there's no compromise, as I've learned from being a part of this study group. It's either love or it's not. And if it's not, it's made, it's not created. Because God, who created us, we have the ability to create in that image, and that is only as love. Nothing, it just can't be anything else.
So does that also refer to, say, children? You know,
Well,
is that?
Great point. Now, what part of the children? Who made the children? Who created the children?
Are the children the bodies of the children,
Exactly.
or the children something else?
Because even the parents didn't create the spirit that is the child, but certainly made the whole physical representation somehow. Even that, it's kind of a miracle. There's no like, it's just automatic process.
Do you want to say a little more, Paula, about
No, I was just
question?
You know, when I read that, I wondered if that was referring to, you know, to children, to people's children.
Are you referring to your real creations? Is that particularly what?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. But I understand what you're saying, you know, and I agree. They, you know, parents would not have created their spirit, you know, those you know, the spiritual creations would not have been a creation of the physical parents.
But what is the creation?
But as I was reading that, I wondered if that was because you were talking about creations as whatever, you know, anything that is created, you know, in love, with love, or, you know, protection, or, you know, those other things that it meant.
Well, I think the love a parent would, oops, Paula, can anybody hear Paula?
Oh, Paula, yeah, we don't hear you.
Paula, we don't hear you.
Something must have happened with the microphone.
Something happened with your microphone, Paula. We don't hear you.
Oh,
now we hear
you. There you are.
Huh.
We got you back.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Say that again, please.
What the other thought that I had was about the whole, how we make that everyone makes an ego or self for, you know, for ourselves, and that carries over here into this paragraph of that, you know, of what the ego, the role of the ego. But in thinking about children as well, was how late most of us come to a realization of the ego, or just to an understanding of the ego concept, you know, that it seems that most of us come to that understanding of what the ego is and how it, that the control that it has over us. And it gives me hope that there are more and more people that are aware of this, and hope that they will do something to teach their children about the concept of the ego earlier, so that more people will have that understanding before, way down the line, before they're adults. And it just seems like there's that with we're trying to go back and undo a lot of that, unlearn so much of that, the ego influence that we have had so much our lives. And hopefully in the future there will be generations that will learn about this earlier and not have to unlearn so much.
Absolutely, Paula. And what you're saying leads in, I think, perfectly to the next really 2 paragraphs when we talk about self-esteem. So let's just, there's a whole bunch to read, so let's just continue. Well, we can get back to. So we're on paragraph 5, and I'd like to read paragraph 5 and 6 because to continue Paula's line of thought here. Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. Babies scream in rage if you take away a knife or scissors, although they may well harm themselves if you do not. In this sense, you are still a baby. You have no sense of real self-preservation and are likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you the most. Yet, whether or not you recognize it now, you have agreed to cooperate in the effort to become both harmless and helpful, attributes that must go together. Your attitudes, even towards this, are necessarily conflicted because all attitudes are ego-based. This will not last. Be patient a while and remember that the outcome is as certain as God. Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will have to do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better and can therefore do without the thing you give. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. It is therefore continually preoccupied with the belief in scarcity that gave rise to it. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Self-esteem, in ego terms, means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence. Now, I'm not sure about everyone here, but I know when I was in school, in middle school, there's this huge segments, huge focus on self-esteem and stress, completely solidifying our image in our body. Like, whatever you look like, let's look in the mirror. You look fine. This is who you are. And it's like, wake up here, folks. Why are we pushing the pain point? These middle school students who need spirit identity. We all need spirit identity. Mm-hmm. But when at that critical age where there's just, hormonal changes And then the school just completely says, yes, all these are true. This is you. This is your body. And no matter what you may look like and all your limits are all okay. No wonder all these, it's like, yeah, it doesn't help because it's just teaching the problem. It doesn't make any sense. And also I think, which is really cool, I'm sure we all have something to say, stress. We're told that stress is a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence. So A Course in Miracles has a way of just getting these terms which seem so complicated, like stress. And if you ask someone what stress means, there's all these different things. And Course in Miracles just defines it here. Any perceived threat to the ego's existence. And it holds true. Every case, it's being worried about the continuation of the ego. That's all stress is. Being stressed about substance or being stressed about lack of something, all rooted in ego existence, all rooted in body, which is pretty interesting. So I wonder if we were to replace this self-esteem, if anybody has any thoughts, if we were to go into 6th grade America and overhaul this chapter on self-esteem, what would we replace it with? Who has any thoughts?
Well, I think the opposite of what you were told. It's like, this is your, you look in the mirror and this is not who you are.
Yeah.
Your body will change. It's not going to stay this way. And so you cannot identify with this thing that is going to change throughout your life. And it's not who you are.
Absolutely.
And also, isn't it, if you think of in the younger grades, the children are very open, very accepting. I worked many years in different schools working with diverse abilities. Kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, they didn't notice the child that had a physical disability or cognitive or whatever. They just embraced. So what happens to that 8, 9-year-old, like those years, I think continuing the community circle kind of outlook, but there's something that happens developmentally and we miss it and we let them slide into adulthood, because that childlike wonder and awe, there I'm pulling in some terms from but that's why I love children. That's why I love working with them, because the wonder and awe of children is what makes them fun, and they know they don't know. And then all of a sudden we turn it external, where when the kids are younger, they are internal. And when they just start to look out and see, is there something out there? We just grab them and say, yes, come on this way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, Teresa, like driving by preschools and things, like I understand certainly how that we have a lot to teach kids that are just new in this world. There's a lot, but they have a lot to teach us. It needs to be seen as reciprocal. Like the preschool teachers are learning just as much as the students. There needs to be that understanding. The teachers are learning just as much as they're teaching.
But the ego gets in the way, because as adults, we want to believe that we know more than the teacher or than the student. We are, as opposed to the student teacher relationship, and honoring that. Because in any school, any high school, university, anything, the best teachers that are the most loved usually are the teachers who are still students. They're still excited about life. They're learning new things. They're traveling. They have hobbies. Those are usually the teachers that the kids and the students love anyways, because they're still open. As opposed to working in the same room for 20 years, teaching the same units in the same grade You know, we don't want to start over and teach a different grade. My goodness, we'd have to make new units up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's scary. So it's amazing what some adults do to themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah. Bona fide adults.
By the way, I just found out just this week that counseling sessions are beginning in some schools in the third grade. Third grade.
Counseling for just for
Self-esteem. Self-esteem.
boy.
Yeah. Third grade. 8 years old.
Yeah. There's
Now
this.
you want to feel good about yourself. You want to know that you are, capital S, the loving self identity. You do want to know that. And of course, you don't want to just have somebody, you know, tear you down in the playground and just let them, you know, hurt you in that way. But there's a way to do it that doesn't involve separation, isn't there? I don't know what that way is. But to answer your question, what if these children were exposed to, and it's not even that they would believe, it's because they already knew. It's just that we've already tried to socialize them out of it by the time they get into school. If they could go forward with the idea of, you know, we're one, we're not separate. And then of course, if somebody is, for whatever reason, hurting somebody else, then as a tribe, you come together and you say, hey, like, don't do that. Like that's not nice. Don't do that. But not because they're separate from you, not because you have to protect your identity, but because you're all in it together.
It's such a beautiful time where conscious adults could be role modeling instead of separating, you know, and then you'll get the parents that are marching down there because Billy hurt my son, as opposed to if Billy's having a hard time, what could we do to help Billy so Billy doesn't hurt Stephen? Right. And heck, it really works often when the parents get together and have coffee together and they put the children in the same household, playing together with the, you know, with toys, and the parents are seen as friendly. There's so many things that's, yeah, it's really sad when they escalate, when it could be diffused and the lessons could be taught so simply, so quickly.
Well, and teach it to ourselves so that in this world that we're living in, we don't contribute to escalation either, right? Each in our own heart, in our own way.
Yes.
I need some counseling in a hurry right now. Okay, here's the deal. I'll just give it to you real quick. Once upon a time, I went to a man to get my computer upgraded. And he was Chinese, and he did a good job. So I said, you know, who are you? What are you? So he told me, and I said, I'll take your kids and look after them. So now I had 2 Chinese grandchildren. And I mean, I'd take them and see, the husband and wife were engineers, and they couldn't make a living. So they were in retail computer anyway. So I created a family. So doesn't she get on the phone today? And she is the wife, who's also an engineer. They're brilliant and very spiritually advanced. And she's crying her eyes out. And I'm thinking, get off the phone, woman, you know? I have an online
Course on love.
So the long and short of it is that she busted her ass for 6 months at a time, cooking for her husband's parents. And she says they took me for granted. And now she's crying and saying that I serve people only to express love, and nobody, like her husband has two other siblings, and the other two have said, we will not have these two in our house. So she said, I finally told my husband, I quit. And I'm thinking, get off the line, lady. You know, I have an online. I mean, I was crying with her. I do love her. But the bottom line, the question is this, that
It's in here.
pardon?
Go ahead, say the question.
Yeah.
Because I believe the answer, I read it in here. Go ahead.
Well, I read the answer because you know what? It's just getting on my nerves so bad. It's like reach for the top.
Well, it's about transaction. So when we come from love, and this is the unadulterated pure love that is egoless, it is not transactional. So if she's making the food, it is done with pure love, and there is no expectations. It is, otherwise it's transactional. And as soon as our behaviors are motivated by transactional, she wants love back, she wants accolades, she wants a foot rub from her husband, whatever it is, as soon as it's coming from transaction, then it isn't unadulterated, pure love. Like, what's the word I want?
Love.
Unalterable love, right?
Perfect.
Yeah, but they devolved her into that. See, like,
What did you say, Shabana?
There's her lesson. There's what she needs to learn to move to her next awareness, is that she chose. That was her choice to cook. She chose it, so she can't be mad at them.
He chose it. Yeah.
To figure out her lesson that she learned from there. Otherwise, she's in the Garden of Eden. She's doing things from shame and guilt, and right, we're right back to the creation story.
okay, that you get a 5-star review, Teresa. Okay.
Notice how fresh it was on my tongue. It's come up a few times last week for me.
Thank you kindly. I'm very, very grateful.
You're welcome.
Now, Tim, Mr. Noe, you can start reading again.
Okay, good. Because there's so much to read this week.
I apologize, but I needed to hear this because I was tearing my hair out. I mean, I did end the thing graciously, but just barely.
Good. And now the atonement is accepted.
Thank you.
Good. We're on paragraph 7. Yeah, Karen, what's the proper response?
Thank you, Shabana.
You're welcome, Karen.
All right. Good. We're on 7 here. The ego literally lives by comparisons. Equality is beyond its grasp, and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. Appetites are getting mechanisms representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of body appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. Body appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body. But the idea that this is possible is a decision of the mind, which has become completely confused about what is really possible. The ego believes it is completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it thinks it originated. This is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification, or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. It is not free, however, to open the premise to question, because the premise is its foundation. This is the premise. The ego is the mind's belief that it is completely on its own. The ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. Spirit, in its knowledge, is unaware of the ego. It does not attack it. It merely cannot conceive of it at all. While the ego is equally unaware of spirit, it does perceive itself as being rejected by something greater than itself. This is why self-esteem in ego terms must be delusional. The creations of God do not create myths, although creative effort can be turned into mythology. It can do so, however, only under one condition. What it makes is then no longer creative. Myths are entirely perceptual and so ambiguous in form and characteristically good and evil in nature that the most benevolent of them is not without fearful connotations. So before we go more into myths and magic, it's at least worth addressing this definition, it seems, that we've received. The ego believes it is completely on its own. Another way of saying it, ego is the mind's belief that it is completely on its own. Another point that it was said. The ego is the belief that we are on our own, that we are separate, that what we see is what we are, and that's all we are, that we're on our own, that our thoughts are isolated, that we have private thoughts. And in order to establish this, that this seemingly, if we're just a body and we have private thoughts, then we have to assume that bodies that we see that are similar to us have their own private thoughts. And that's another ego. So we've made an ego. I see this body that looks kind of like me. That's another ego. That's another person. That's another thing that's on their own. To confirm that this ego is on its own.
Tim, would you please answer the question? It's the first sentence. The ego believes it's completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it thinks it originated. I don't really know how the ego thinks it originated. How does the ego think it originated?
Well, I believe we will at least, let's see, which paragraph does it, maybe the next paragraph. Here, let's just read paragraph 9 and maybe that can,
okay, yeah.
At least it lends itself to that discussion. Myths and magic are closely associated since myths are usually related to ego origins and magic to the powers of the ego, the powers the ego ascribes to itself. Mythological systems generally include some accounts of the creation and associate this with its particular form of magic. The so-called battle for survival is only the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. This battle for survival, this creation. This beginning is usually associated with physical birth.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is hard to maintain that the ego existed before that point in time. The more religiously ego-oriented may believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist after a temporary lapse into ego life. Some even believe that the soul will be punished for this lapse. However, salvation does not apply to spirit, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged.
Yeah, thank you.
So, I think it is interesting because my first instinct to hone in on this question is describing how it thinks it originated is kind of like a self-creation kind of thing. Egos are kind of self, but notice how it says describing how it thinks it originated. In a sense, it even the ego knows that something made it. it came into existence somehow. So the physical birth, and I think these myths kind of point towards something else making the ego. I don't even know. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Not sure
So
either.
confusing.
Yeah, it is. It is. But the physical birth that makes sense. I mean, especially from an atheistic point of view, a non-religious, strictly non-religious viewpoint.
Yeah.
The ego, the personality, consciousness, that would all be birth to death, as we see it in this life experience. Yeah, that was clarifying.
And completely on its own.
Completely on its own. Yep.
Yeah. There is a just as you brought in atheism, there is a little, I think it's a nice little mention at some point in here that speaks to, it kind of puts up against each other atheists and martyrs. And it has a nice little, there's like a few sentences on it where atheists have the belief that we're on our own, and martyrs think that we need to struggle, or we need to be punished, or we're guilty. We need some sort of we need to do something horrible in order to be saved. It uses so much better words than that. I'll have to bring it in whenever we discuss it. Yeah.
Well, an atheist maybe can conceive of itself as on its own in a somewhat arrogant, you might say, kind of way, and a martyr might conceive of itself as on its own in a defeatist kind of way. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
I'm just atoning for the whole crew.
Thank you, Shabana.
We feel it. Okay, here. I'm just actually curious. So this is apparently in chapter 9. Okay. Okay, here we go. As if we don't have enough to read, let me just read this little thing. No right mind can believe that its will is stronger than God's. If then a mind believes that its will is different from God's, he can only decide either that there is no God or that God's will is fearful. Okay, that's the distinction. Atheist says there is no God, and then martyr says that God's will is fearful. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get back to that. And
coming up,
maybe
2 chapters away.
Maybe next year we'll get there. No, that should be maybe this year. Okay, so we're paragraph 10 here. Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated. The ego cannot survive without judgment, and is laid aside accordingly. The mind then has only one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic, because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres. So we need a current analysis on sentence 2. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack.
Right. So wrong-mindedness is always about attack. It's always fearful of attack, or trying to protect itself from attack, or attacking somebody else. And so right-mindedness is not that. Right-mindedness is uniformly without attack, meaning there's no exception to the rule. You can't sometimes be right-minded with an attack thought. Right-mindedness, right-minded thoughts are never with attack. So they're uniformly without attack. And so the next step being one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, which we were talking about earlier, about the bridge, or about being lifted up, it's automatic, because there is no wrong-minded thinking. There is no fear. So what's left? Love.
Excellent. And what about
the KJG analysis?
yeah, one more. The mind then has only one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic. This is the last few sentences. The ego cannot survive without judgment and is laid aside accordingly. The mind then has only one direction in which it can move. I just think this is interesting.
You know how
Go ahead.
You know how relaxing that is? The mind has only one direction in which it can move. I mean, the choice has already been made. You're in right-minded thinking. You're already in the state of little willingness. You're already in right-minded thinking. You're already in love. Like, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to determine anything. You don't have to compare anything. It's like, oh, wow, it's so easy. Just be. It's automatic.
Yeah. It's like being in the restaurant of life, and we're handed the menu, and there's just one option. It's love. Okay, there, I'll take this.
I'll take this. Tow truck driver.
You did extremely well with him, Karen.
Excuse me?
You did extremely well with him. I was impressed.
With Tim, Noah, or with the tow truck driver?
Well, with both of them, but I was thinking of the tow truck driver.
I am telling you, I fell in love with the tow truck driver. There's just no two ways about it. He was talking about driving truck, and he was talking about being in the snow for the last 12 hours, pulling people out of ditches. He was talking about his kids and his man cave back at his house and chopping firewood. So we had about 3 hours together last night in the tow truck.
Well, I bet you he's in love with you too.
I don't know.
I mean,
Doesn't matter.
I'm definitely in love with you, because when I listen to your observations and comments, I'm thinking, my goodness, he is really something.
I'm in love with you too.
Thank you.
Oh, and thank you, Siobhan.
Oh my gosh, yes, you all.
I almost forgot.
Well done.
Oh.
Excellent.
And by the time the guy dropped me off here, he had another hour and 45 minutes to get back to where he hailed from, which wasn't where my car decided to scream a little bit. Yeah, so long day.
Yeah, but I don't think he's ever met anyone who was as gracious and sincere as you. I mean, that's a lonely job.
Thank you, Shabana.
Thank you, Karen.
It's a thank you party.
It is. And thank you, caller, for being here. At some point, well, it doesn't matter. We see 1907. That's a beautiful caller. So I think this is the last paragraph.
1907.
Paragraph 11. And this is Teresa's section. Teresa's jam. It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. You must expand upon this, Teresa. I know you have a star by it.
Well, let's read it all and then go.
Okay.
Because it's just this in a couple lines, and then
Sure.
let's pull it all together.
Let's finish this. So, it is necessary only, so start from the beginning of this paragraph. It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. It is necessary only because misperception is a block to knowledge, while accurate perception is a stepping stone towards it. The whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable realization that all perception is unnecessary. This removes the block entirely. You may ask how this is possible as long as you appear to be living in this world. That is a reasonable question. You must be careful, however, that you really understand it. Who is the you who are living in this world? Spirit is immortal, and immortality is a constant state. It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be, because it implies no change at all. It is not a continuum, nor is it understood by being compared to an opposite. Knowledge never involves comparisons. That is its main difference from everything else the mind can grasp. Just a beautiful...
That's what I needed to have taken away from me. The comparisons. That's what's, that's what I've been harming myself with.
Yeah.
It's what we all do. We all drive ourselves crazy with that. Yeah. In wrong-minded thinking.
Yeah, but no, I do more of it.
Okay.
And I'm not competitive at all.
You're not comparing your wrong-mindedness to mine right now?
Never, never. But I am more wrong-minded, yes.
So this use of knowledge never involving comparisons. Again, the word kept coming up. That's when I went, what do they mean by knowledge? Yeah, so that was really cool. So then when I went to the clarifications of the terms, and that knowledge is just that no past, no present, no ego, no little self, that is just the embodiment of what is in one is in the whole, and it's all perfect, and it's all love, and there's nothing to compare it to. Right? And we get down the path. Look, the bridge is there.
Because there's no thing to compare it to.
Yeah.
There's just the one.
Yeah, that's right. No form.
It's a lovely section. The first time I read through it, I went, oh, I think I liked last week's section better. Like it was more entertaining to my brain or something initially. But once I actually reread this 2-3 times, started teasing it all out, then I went, wow, this is a pretty deep section.
Yeah.
I know every section's going to be deep. Don't worry, I realize.
I know.
But I really liked it.
It is. It stays true. Of course, Miracle stays true to what it says, and that knowing any part of knowledge, truth, I should say, any part of truth is all of truth. So really, each one of these little sections is all of A Course in Miracles in a little section, and it's just all it contains the whole in the part, because it has no size. It's not. It's rooted in truth, which operates the same way, because it's one. There's no parts. There's no smaller part or bigger part. There's just truth.
Well said.
Let's see. I think this is very fascinating, and as we tie this one to a close, you must be careful that you really understand this question of how it's possible we can understand this while living in this world. Who is the you who are living in this world? Spirit is immortal, and immortality is a constant state. It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be, because it implies no change at all. And this is just, I find it fascinating. This is obvious, like eternal, yeah, it's always. Eternal is outside of time. Eternal is always. So the concept of having a test, a trial for eternal bliss or eternal punishment is a contradiction. It doesn't understand eternity, because it makes a starting point for eternity. There is no starting point. Eternity is now. If heaven or hell are not here now, then they're nowhere. They can't begin. Eternity doesn't begin at some point, because then it's not eternal. So eternity captures this moment here and now. So we can't, this is heaven or this is hell. or they're not. It doesn't begin at a certain point. That's entirely an ego concept, which I believe that this sort of thought is lost in a lot of religious minded thought, where you know, eternal paradise, but in order to have it, we need to do something. Just a limited view. It's not eternal. I guess there's only so many ways you could say it, but I just think it's such an important something to understand. Something to we already understand it, but we've put blocks in the way. Perception blocks, chalks. My father is a recreational pilot, and when you park the airplane, you put, it's called the chalks in front of the wheel so that it doesn't roll away. So put our perceptual chalks on our wheels. We have to just take them off, soar away into what's the opposite term, Karen? We have illusion land and just love, I guess.
I like love.
Yeah, simple. Yeah.
Illusion land is psychotherapy.
Could be. Very well could be.
Teresa, I have something on the chat for you. Did you read it?
Me? Did you say me?
Yeah, I said Teresa.
Oh, yes. No, I didn't read it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
welcome. Thank you, Sabana.
If I ever need therapy, I'm going to phone you up.
Okay, honey.
The ACIM hotline.
Yeah, we'll have Teresa on call.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you all for being here and for sharing this and being we've all have a better understanding of, we've all taken out some blocks to perception after this. I will make that claim. And just a little teaser for next week's discussion. One of the lines from next section, which is love without conflict, is, it has never really entered your mind to give up every idea you ever had that opposes knowledge. Like, oh, okay. You can't just stop there. You have to read. What does it mean by this? Anyway, so we will consider that idea next week. And thank you, Teresa. Love you. Love you, Shabana. Love you,
Love you, Karen. Love you, Shabana. Love you, Tim.
Love you, 2378. Tim, Shabana, Teresa.
And thank you, Shabana.
Thank you, Tim, and I love you too.
Thank you. Amen.